like to call to order the policy subcommittee meeting and committee of the whole meeting. Nan, roll call, please.
Mr. Satterwhite?
Present.
Mr. Nicholson?
Present.
Mr. Ford?
Present.
And observing is Ms. Capola? And Ms. Gately?
Yes.
Okay.
Present.
Okay, just observing. Okay, gotcha.
Great, thank you. So the item on our agenda and the purpose of tonight's meeting is to continue where we left off in the policy manual. So just as a reminder, we were in section J, so we'll start by picking up there. People should have received the draft of the preface to that section that was distributed. So we can touch on that as well, and then maybe get a couple process updates on the parts of J that we are not doing immediately, being the discipline code and the truancy tardiness policy. So everyone's knows what's going on with there. There were a couple questions that Attorney Myhouse were going to look into last time, so we can try to get to those as well. The plan after finishing J is to go back to where we're in B. So if we have time, we'll do a refresher there to pick up where we left off as we march through this. But I'll turn it over to Dorothy. Thank you.
Okay. So good evening, everyone. I believe last time we left off at JICB, which is care of school property by students. Attorney Gallo, do you want to bring up your screen share so we can keep everybody apace with what we're talking about?
Absolutely. So this is the packet that Terry Callan circulated in early October that we're still working on. And Ms. Presser, I believe JICB, care of school property by students, is where we're starting.
That is correct.
So that's going to be, and I'll just do as I did last time, that's going to start on page 54 of the PDF. So that is the policy there for you.
Okay. So on this policy, I don't see any reason to change anything in the wording of the policy. I do have one sort of question about the manual as a whole. In terms of citing the student handbooks as the legal reference, very often the legal reference is really meant to be the Mass General Laws legal reference. And usually student handbooks you want tied to the policy manual, but they're not usually the legal reference. So just as we go through, just want to know if you want to leave those as legal references or not.
Jerry?
Yeah, I would assume we would update them to the statute. Go ahead, Attorney Satterwhite.
And I think that this is important to update, especially with the computers being in everyone's household now. And that's obviously much more expensive than a book. So I think that it would be important to obviously reference what the statute says, but also update this to maybe, I know that the last paragraph says that this regulation also pertains to athletic equipment, band equipment, etc. But I think that we should specifically address the laptops and other equipment.
Okay, so just to clarify, there would be no legal reference here. I would just, as I went through the policy manual, if I saw student handbooks as a legal reference, omit it.
Okay.
That's fine with me. Does anybody else have a thought on that? It's kind of circular to refer to the handbook.
Yeah. So then that was point one. And then Attorney Satterwhite, I think you probably made a good point about wanting to add something that was more specific about technology items or computers to this policy.
Yeah, and then the handbooks aren't approved by us; they're approved by the superintendent, correct?
Well, and superintendent, please jump in. But there are parts of the handbook, at least, that are approved by the school committee that have the discipline portions in it.
So when we have the reference as a student handbook, every year they're updated. So this would be my assumption is a living document like that changes because of the handbook, correct?
Not quite sure what you're asking.
So if we approve this, it's going to be approved today's date, but then it's referenced in the handbook, which is updated every year.
Correct.
Okay.
So, Attorney Satterwhite, just on the computer point, you were suggesting we specifically reference the laptop in that last sentence there? Was that the request?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Anybody have any comments on that? And just to ask for people are gonna have to speak up because when it's in the screen share, I can't see everybody's face. So speak up and have a thought.
All right,
Yeah, Lorraine.
all right, so here it also says this regulation also pertains to athletic equipment, band equipment, et cetera. We could add there about the computers.
Right. Yep, definitely.
You know,
Do you want
so in general, they're just saying that the students are responsible for materials that belong to the schools and that we let them use, that they are responsible for it. Okay, that's all.
Yeah.
I just
So
that's where we could add it.
Mr. Ford?
I definitely agree with Michael, the computers.
Okay.
Patrick, the computers, there's no tracking. Is there something that's installed on the computer to know where they are?
The new devices that we bought effective late last spring do have a GPS feature on them.
And are we publishing that anywhere within our documentation so people would be made aware?
I don't think that is formally published anywhere.
Okay, so that's what I think of too, Jarrett. When those are the two things. Obviously, computers are much more expensive than books, and then you have the I think the issue with at least some of the devices having GPS on them, and obviously, I think that should be published somewhere within. I don't know if this is the right place or not.
Respectfully, I wouldn't necessarily say, because who knows, the next round of devices that we purchase might not. I don't know that necessarily should live here, but I agree that it should be made. Folks should be made aware of that.
All right, may I? So one question is, do you want to say computers, laptops, technology devices? What
Yes.
Wording?
That's a good wording for me.
Which one?
No, I like all of them.
Okay.
Because we even have iPads now, so maybe technology devices would encompass all of it. Jared, do you agree?
Yeah, I'm fine with that. I'm fine with the longer one, whatever. But yeah, I don't have strong feelings.
Okay. I will put in all three. And just my suggestion and my thought would be that if the statement about GPS do you have acceptable use policies that students are required to sign, that might be the place for talking about the GPS?
Yeah.
That's a great point. Where does that document live, the acceptable use policy?
That's a good question. I don't know. My initial thought is that it's on the website somewhere, but I wouldn't be able to point you directly to that.
I haven't looked at section I yet, but generally the acceptable use policy lives in section I, which is instruction and curriculum.
Okay. And I think this is a good point in timely because we're spending so much time with technology in the home. I think there might be questions over time about what people's use of the technology, but also our use of the data, or potentially vendors' use of the data. We are using a third party learning information system, learning management system. That might be worth a conversation apart from this. Led by somebody who has the most sort of the best handle on how this should work, how it's working now, and any suggestions of how to make it work better, but also how it's being communicated to students and families and teachers for that matter too, because we're giving them devices now. Maybe that's something that we could ask Dr. Tutwiler to task somebody with.
Dr. Tutwiler. Oops.
Yeah, Ms. Gately?
Don't they have like a list and the parent and the student signs off on it? They read through it and they sign off on this handbook. So they're aware of all these policies, rules and regulations. Isn't that what the handbook says?
Yeah, there is annually that requirement. Yes. Whether or not folks actually spend the time of reviewing the document is another thing. But there is, we've been following the regulation which requires, for a long time we provided each student with a paper copy. In the environment that we're in now, we've made paper copies available in the school and made the handbook available virtually. And then there's an acknowledgement that families can access it.
And sorry, Jared.
Yeah, very sad.
And I know that there are devices. They're being used by students. So obviously there may be issues where the devices there are errors or functionality issues with the laptop, but there also can be user error or user so besides the GPS tracking, what I think that whatever we put, whether it's in the handbook or within our policies, we should also address, one of the things the mayor normally says in the beginning of our meeting is, when you're on the computer, be careful not to share your screen or do all that stuff. Sometimes you might pick up a background conversation. Like it's not us, you know what I mean? It's the user that's utilizing the computer, but it could necessarily get someone in trouble if they're talking about something they shouldn't be talking about while the computer, while our computer's in their household and someone overhears it.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that aside from the GPS, just normal, like I guess best practices.
Yeah.
When around a device that's owned by us.
Yeah.
Because 4 out of the 5 SJC decisions today came on criminal cases, and they all involved the use of cell towers and cellular data. So that's what got me thinking of this.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a good point. We've changed the operation of the district dramatically in terms of the use of technology, and so it's a good thing to review. So does that sound okay, Dr. Tutwiler, for you to find someone to take a look at that? Yeah.
Totally.
Great. All right. Any other comments on this one?
So I'm going to add, after banned equipment, computers, laptops, and other technology devices.
Right.
Okay.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you.
You ready for JICC?
Yes.
Yep. So JICC is page 55 in your packet, and I have that on the screen now. That's student conduct on school buses.
So the only change I would recommend on this is on the last paragraph in the second line, it says parents of children, just to change that to parents/guardians. Other than that, no changes.
I agree.
Great. Any comments there?
Good.
Awesome. I think we're good.
So JICC-R gets a little bit more complicated. It is student conduct on school buses.
And this is going to be on page 56 of your packet. So
there is also policy EEAEC-R, if you notice, it says that these two policies are the same, but there really are two versions of EEAEC-R in section E. So I think my suggestion on this, because I also started looking at section E, and there are quite a number of policies that encompass transportation in section E, that I actually work with whoever the right transportation person is in the district to streamline these policies and come back to you with a recommendation about JICC-R that would coincide with the policies in EEAEC.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Okay.
Do you, Dr. Tutwiler, do you want to suggest someone now, or do you want to just follow up with?
Yeah, the person is Dave Hegan, the transportation director. Either I or Charlie can easily connect her, and we can sort of, iron out the wrinkles as it relates to that policy language.
Perfect. Thank you.
Okay, just let me catch up with my notes for a second here. Okay. So the next one is JICF.
And that's going to be on 62 of your packet. And JICF is gang activity, secret societies.
Okay, and again, there's very little to change here. The policy in the Lynn manual and the policy in the MASC reference manual match, except for pronouns, where the Lynn policy has his/her and MASC has their, which I believe we've decided that when we run into the his/her, we would change it to their.
Yep, that makes sense.
Question about the policy?
Yeah, Attorney Satterwhite.
So the second paragraph of this it doesn't look like it's as specific as to gang activity and secret societies, where it says that the superintendent will have open line communications with local law enforcement agency and provide and share information. Can we make that specific as to these things? Because I believe a couple of years ago, before I got on the school committee, you guys established some sort of policy with regards to undocumented people in our schools. So I would hate for this to be somehow used. I'm not saying it's going to be, but to share information about who's documented and undocumented in our schools.
Yeah, thank you, Attorney Satterwhite. Maybe there's a reference there. Not only to make it specific to the gang activity secret societies, but also you could say consistent with the sanctuary schools resolution adopted, and I think it was in 2016 or something like that.
I agree. Maybe at the end of that paragraph, we add something that says that it doesn't contradict, or that all actions should align with X policy.
Yep.
So I'm looking at the phrase "in this effort."
Okay.
So we could make that more specific, in the effort to avert gang activity or something along those lines.
I'm fine with that.
Okay.
And I still don't think it would hurt to add that other sentence.
I was going to get to that. Just have to write this one thing down. And then I think you want to say something like all actions should comply with. And then name the policy, that's the sanctuary policy.
Mm-hmm.
Does that sound right?
Yeah, I think that sounds right. I mean, I also think I think those are good next steps for this. I also think there's a bigger conversation that we've sort of mentioned a couple of times as going through this, that we're thinking about our, the discipline code, the approach to the, student discipline and how things are escalated, and that, which includes sort of the communication with local law enforcement. So I imagine this is a topic that we're going to be revisiting, but it just goes to show it shows up in several policies. Because I think even the gang, the idea of prohibiting gang symbols presumably relates to the conversations that are happening about the dress code. I think the changes that Attorney Satterwhite that we just talked about, that just suggested that we just talked about, makes sense, but this is also one that's in the subject of the ongoing conversation.
So for the time being, just the changes that Attorney Satterwhite asked about, but come back and revisit this? Is that after discussing the dress code policy?
We don't have to come. I mean, so my understanding is that Dr. Tutwiler is working with his team on with student leaders and with other members of the team on the discipline approach, and this would be, I think this is implicated by that. We don't have to have a specific revisit.
Okay.
Anybody else have thoughts on that? Okay.
Okay. So we can move to JICFA, which is prohibition of hazing.
Yep. So there are a couple of hazing related policy manual documents. The first is, Ms. Presser said, JICFA. That's on page 63 of your packet. And we're going to go 63 through about 66 are the hazing related policies.
So there are two versions of JICFA. There's the version which is currently in the Lynn manual, and a version which is in the MASC reference manual. In my read, the MASC reference manual more clearly lays out the responsibilities and the consequences around hazing. So I would recommend looking at that policy to adopt. It also has the legal references, which would get added to, however this gets adopted. If there were, in the middle paragraph of the Lynn policy, there's, I think it's actually directly from the law, some examples of hazing. And if you wanted to, we could put the examples of hazing in the MASC version, or we could leave it as is.
Does anybody have comments on that? I think that makes sense about the MASC version and the use of that.
So do you want to just take the MASC version, or do you want to add examples into it?
I'm just looking at the examples.
Yeah.
I don't think the examples are
Necessary.
I'm just, so without, do we define hazing if there's not examples? And then,
yes, it is defined.
okay. Is it defined in this policy or somewhere else?
Oh, actually, in the policy, it is not defined.
Is it defined in the statute?
Yes, it's defined in the statute, and basically it's that paragraph in the statute. I believe that paragraph comes directly from statute.
The example paragraph?
Yes, such conduct shall include whipping, beating, so forth. That is, I believe, directly from statute.
Oh, and it's any conduct or method of induction, okay. So it's a reference.
Yes.
Yeah, I don't see the need to copy paste from the statute, because then if the statute changes, then the reference would have to be changed, but, what do others think about that?
I'm fine with the legal reference being at the bottom of the MASC version. And I agree with you by putting the policy, if it's dated, it took us 30 years to get to this. So I don't want to have the same issue for down the line.
Okay,
I agree, MASC version.
great. Thanks, guys.
So the next two that are related are JICFA-E, which is actually the statute.
Yeah, we don't need that, right?
No, you really don't need the statute if you have the reference. And to take it one step further, then JICFA-R is the regulations. And you certainly don't need both the law and the regulations, I don't believe. We could we could add the regulations as a legal reference along with the law.
Definition in there as well. Is this a CMR or is this?
Yes, it is a CMR.
Okay. And those change too.
Yes, they do.
So, I don't know how I don't believe we need a CMR in our policies, to be honest with you.
You mean the reference or the actual text?
The actual text it looks like it's just from a CMR, but.
Yeah, no, I agree. But
I don't even know where that's from.
We could just add the reference, the CMR reference.
Yep.
Okay. Great.
Okay, just let me mark that down. Okay. So we're using the MASC version and not including -E, which is the statute, and not including -R, which is the regulation, correct?
Correct.
Can I just, Attorney Myhouse, how do you feel about that?
There's no need to have redundant about it as long as it's a reference
Okay, perfect.
to regulations.
Thank you.
Great.
Okay, so then the next policy is, the next policy for us to look at, because we've already looked at JICFB, which is the bullying intervention and prevention plan. So the next policy to look at is JICG, which is smoking by students.
And that's going to be found on page 82 of your packet, smoking by students, JICG.
And to complicate looking at the packet a little bit, I'd sort of like to look at JICH at the same time.
So Jared, can I ask a question?
Yeah, Attorney Satterwhite.
So the policy that's before us, the source says Lynn. So this is a policy that we created, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
And I see certain things like the student is required to review literature. I'm not sure. Is that legal? Can we I'm not sure we can force kids to do certain things like that. Attorney Myhouse?
I agree with you.
So, I think that, can we see the mass version?
Yes. So,
Go ahead, Ms. Bresser. Yeah.
okay. So the mass version actually combines alcohol, tobacco, and drug use. So we don't have a separate smoking policy or tobacco policy, and it also points out that it's prohibited, not just that it's in the title. But one of the things that the MASC policy does, that a lot of, I know superintendents have been looking for in the past few years is calling out vaping and e-cigarettes as prohibited, to make that very clear that that is prohibited, as well as cigarettes or other tobacco products. And the MASC policy also talks about the verbal screening, which is now a requirement, and there's nothing that in the Lynn policies that refers to the verbal screening for risky behaviors.
So page 90.
Sorry.
Oh, no, I apologize, Mr. Satterwhite. What was that?
Did you just pass through another one that was about alcohol use and? Okay.
Yes. So I was going through the Lynn policies that exist, and so JICH is the combined mask policy there. So I was just giving a quick scroll through as Ms. Presser was speaking.
So the JICH version of for Lynn covers drug and alcohol and substance abuse. It has a lot of procedural aspects to it in terms of the administrative responsibility and the teacher responsibility. And it also, it's 8 pages, and there's one point where it has the substance abuse policy, and then later on starts again with the substance abuse policy with a different with a different outline. So I think there's the need to separate policy from procedure in this a bit.
Yeah, so that makes sense. But so JICG is the Lynn smoking policy.
Yeah.
JICH is our specific policy that has the policies and procedures mixed.
Yeah.
And then go ahead.
Oh, and then there's the MASC version of JICH, which actually stays at the policy level rather than going into procedures and addresses the verbal screening.
So that's just the one page.
Say that again?
What page?
What page is it?
Attorney Gallo, do you want to name the page numbers again for the?
Sure. So I'll tell you, JICG, which is Lynn Smoking by Students, is 82 in your packet. JICH, which is Lynn Drug and Alcohol Substance Abuse, is 83 in your packet. And then the Mass Association of School Committees is JICH, which is 90 in your packet. And that's the one that's on the screen now that I believe Ms. Presser is suggesting that we adopt. And I would, if I could, echo her sentiment on that. If you look through the Lynn policies, there's really procedures mixed through, and there's even reference to certain 800 numbers to call depending on which substance is being abused. And I'm not quite sure if those 800 numbers even still exist, or if that would be the right route to send a student or staff member who's facing those issues.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's individual's name too, I think. Anyway.
Yeah.
Yes, I believe there are.
So I have a question.
Yes,
So anywhere in this policy is vaping or e-cigarettes being addressed?
Yes, in the MASC version, it directly calls out vaping and e-cigarettes.
And where would I find that?
Page 91.
No, I don't have pages online. Is it the JICH?
It's the second JICH. It's the MASC version of JICH. It's up on the screen right now. Attorney Gallo has it up on the screen.
Yeah, that's one I have in my hand.
Okay. So that's the second line there.
Because that's been a huge problem, I know, with a lot of teachers and vice principals, with vaping and how we get this under control.
And even with COVID, some school districts had to close down because kids are gathering and consuming drugs and alcohol at parties, house parties. So, you know, it's definitely something that we should address. And
At the end of this, it says about contact Project Coca. We not. If you can go through this, Mr. Gallo, at the very end.
Yes, so you're at the end, Ms. Gately.
No, the other way.
The other way.
The other way.
Yeah. Down the bottom. Yeah, it references Wendy Kent. I don't think she's even there anymore.
Oh, it's not.
Well, I think,
you're looking at the Lynn one.
yeah, I think, I think what we're talking about here is the Lynn JICH, where
Yeah.
we talk
It's
about.
out of order a little bit in the printed packets, I think is what happened.
Oh,
Okay. Where we talk about certain organizations, and
Yeah.
you can see certain 800 numbers that we should apparently direct students to call based on what substance is in question.
508 for a Beverly number. This is
Yeah,
old.
so what Ms. Presser, I believe, is proposing is rescinding all of the long procedure and replacing it with just this one page from MASC. Is that
Correct.
So the two
Correct.
documents, Jared. One.
can I see that page? This page?
Ms. Gately, which page are you asking for?
I'm looking for the Mass Association's recommendation.
Okay.
Which page is it? There's so many pages on
Attorney
it.
Gallo, can you put that one up? It's the
It's
JIC.
just one page too, which is
Yep,
great.
it's just that one. Yep.
So we're losing what, 11 pages, Attorney Gallo, for one?
I think that your count is right there, Attorney Satterwhite. And so we'll be saving some trees as well when it comes springtime.
You know, and the idea, right, is that we're saying this is not allowed, and then the implementation of that is the procedure in terms of the.
I like it.
And we're referencing law. That's what we need to do. You know, and then the cross references is I think is also important.
Mm-hmm. And I think one of the goals in this, and you know, having the pleasure of working with Ms. Presser and also Ms. Jules on this a bit is trying to be clear in our approach. And so, you know, kidding about paper aside, eliminating 11 pages or whatever it is will certainly help with clarity.
Right, and some of the information in there is good material, but there's going to be a better home for that in terms of communicating the messages, right?
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay.
Okay, so just let me make my note here.
Did anybody else have a comment on that before we move on? Great.
Okay, that JICH-R is related. I'll wait till Attorney Gallo can reference the page for that one.
That's JICH-R, and that is 92 of your packet.
And this is the drug abuse and alcohol use by students assistant plan, which I would say you're going to have the same reaction to, that it is more procedure than it is policy. And again, may have some outdated information in it.
Yeah.
Yep.
And we're requiring a 4-week substance abuse. This is the Lynn version, right?
Correct. There is no MASC version. Yeah.
The recommendation is to drop this out.
To rescind it. Yeah, I agree. I'm not sure Project Coop does. I didn't know they dealt with with student age people anymore.
Okay. Mr. Ford, is that okay with you?
Yes, I think you should, the references are definitely outdated.
Okay. All right, great.
All right. So the next one then is JICI, dangerous weapons in schools.
Sorry.
Nope.
Jared?
Let's just let Attorney Gallo, I think he's going to announce the page number, and then
Okay.
Attorney Satterwhite.
Thank you. Yes, so JICI Lynn version is on page 94 of your packet. That's what's on the screen now.
Okay. Attorney, if this is about JICI, I'd like to let Ms. Presser tee up her recommendation, then we'll get into question. Okay, go ahead.
It's not, it's about the one we just jumped off of.
All right, great.
Dorothy, what are your thoughts about, putting in the policy that, like on an annual basis, we should have, some sort of, interaction with students on, drugs and alcohol?
In terms of education?
Yeah.
Can that be up to, Dr. Tutwiler?
Well, it would be, curriculum's a part of it, right?
Yeah, but I think they already do something similar to that in health classes, to be honest with you. But I'm not sure, Dr. Tutwiler?
Yeah, that's where that education lives. I can't say definitively from secondary, sixth grade on, whether that is a topic every year. But I know that it's a prominent topic in that curriculum. I can circle back on that.
So one place I would check is your wellness policy.
That's it.
Which that's generally where, the health curriculum is outlined to some extent. That would be the first place that I would check to see if you already have something in policy. I'm trying to just think really quickly off the top of my head if there would be anything in the instruction, in section I about it. But really the first place I would look would be your wellness policy.
Okay, thank you.
Great. Good point.
Okay, so for dangerous weapons in schools, there is no component MASC version to this policy. The first portion of the policy, the gun law, is directly from statute. And the due process portion is actually covered. Last time we talked about a policy about due process. So it's a little bit redundant to talk about due process about one aspect of discipline, I think, in this policy. I did look at if other districts had a JICI about dangerous weapons and found that some do, but they are generally broader than just guns. The policies are usually very short, saying, dangerous weapons, in essence, dangerous weapons are prohibited and there are disciplinary ramifications if a student has a dangerous weapon. So I would suggest either rescinding this policy, or I'd certainly suggest changing the wording if you want to keep it. If you think that it's something that you'd like to keep and investigate further, then I could work with Attorney Gallo to look at some other district policies.
Attorney Gallo?
Ms. Gately?
Thank you. Attorney Miles, was there a time in our district where this was really important, dangerous weapons in the schools? If it's not like in the Nasc Association, the school committee reference, maybe it was something that we really needed?
I think we have statutory references to mandatory suspensions for possession of weapons in the school grounds, already in the Mass General laws. So I don't recall any period of time when this was expressly an issue for the school committee, because it was always handled by the Mass General laws relative to the superintendent's authority to suspend or expel.
Thank you, Attorney Myhouse.
Thank you.
Yeah, Attorney Satterwhite.
And the Sandy Hook project, I'm pretty sure that they might have some information that might be readily available to school districts on what a policy could look like. Obviously, what comes to mind isn't necessarily what's happened in the city of Lynn when I see gun policies or weapon policies. I think of what has happened in schools around the country. So that's where I would look along with the neighboring districts to see what else they have in the policy. But just referencing a law, in detail, it is not necessary. I don't think. I think just a reference with regards to the statute is sufficient. But we should address dangerous weapons. I believe in our policy.
Yeah, is this the only dangerous weapon policy in here? I mean, we've actually found guns in lockers, so it's a real problem. It's a real problem. It should be at least mentioned.
If I could, through Chairman Nicholson, in the discipline code, there is reference to Mass General Laws. It's Chapter 71, Section 37H, and it covers 3 areas, which are assaults on staff, certain drugs, and then dangerous weapons. So the reference to that statute, 37H, in response to Mr. Ford's question, exists in the discipline code.
Okay.
Not only H and a half also.
Yeah.
Say that again, Attorney Myhouse.
It's a correct reference in the part of Attorney Gallo, but it's 37H and 37H and a half, which gives the authority relative to the possession of dangerous weapons within the framework of the superintendent, so far as his ability to expel or suspend.
Got it. Ms. Gailey.
Back in 2004 or 5, when I was teaching at Lynn English High School, it was a really scary time when we all were asked to leave the school. Some people couldn't move their cars because there was a student that had a bomb in a locker and had a bomb possibly in a car. And so they brought the bomb squad out from Boston. I just want to make sure that's covered. Is that being covered, Attorney? My host, do you recall that? It was a scary time for me to have to get off the floor before, God knows, but thank God there wasn't a bomb, but that's what happened. This person had some mental health issues. So,
Sorry, I don't remember that episode. But
well, when you listen, don't forget it.
Yeah.
So that would be considered a dangerous weapon in our schools. But that would come under that,
But the statutory reference made by Attorney Gallo covers that situation so far as not allowing dangerous weapons within the school grounds and the ability of the superintendent to make determination as far as how he's going to proceed. I don't know whether you can try to limit the authority of the superintendent with statutory in its authority.
I just was asking the question to make sure it was covered. That's all I wanted to make sure. So
Yeah, it should be covered.
if it's covered, it's covered. It's fine with me. I'm not like a legal beagle here. I'm just a teacher.
That's a great question. I'm glad we were able to. So, do you feel like that sounds good to you, Lorraine? Then, based on the fact that it's covered under the statute. Great. Any other questions on this or thoughts on this? It's an important issue.
So am I hearing that you feel it's covered enough under the discipline policy, or would you like to consider a policy that calls it out?
I feel like, go ahead, Mr. Ford.
I feel it's covered enough under the discipline policy.
Yeah, I think I think we tend to have we've been taking the approach that the simpler is better as in terms of making this a readable, accessible, usable document, and that making the section references to the statute is the most efficient way to do that. So that would be my feeling as well, along with Mr. Ford. Mr. Satterwhite, does that sound right to you?
I still think that the Sandy Hook Promise is a good organization that really helps guide districts to where they fell short. In that area. So I know that we have the disciplinary issue, but we should. Dangerous weapons obviously are not allowed on our premises, and referencing the gun law, I don't believe is the appropriate way to go about it. But I do think that addressing it should be done. But I'm just one person.
No, but I mean, I'm trying to understand what you're saying here, because so that my understanding of the Sandy Hook Project is about preventing gun violence, and so there's a curriculum about recognizing issues, behavior problems, and that I think that's all worthwhile. I don't know that policy manual is the home for that. The policy is prohibiting the use of weapons. That's the policy.
Correct.
Right.
So it's not going to be addressed in the policy. It's only going to be addressed in the disciplinary. If you bring a dangerous weapon to school, this is what happens. Correct?
Right. It'd be in the disciplinary code. Right.
Okay.
But maybe you could just clarify what the policy that you were suggesting.
Well, I guess there's just no need to. If it's going to be in there, it's going to be identified as what a dangerous weapon is. If it's going to reference the gun law, in the subsection of that disciplinary project, it's going to stay consistent with what we've been doing on all the other ones. So that's correct. Okay. So I'm fine with it as long as that's what the final product is.
Okay.
Okay, so we'll rescind JICI.
Great.
Okay. Which brings us to the next policy alphabetically would be JICK and JICK-E, which we've actually already talked about in terms of the sexual harassment policies that we dealt with at the beginning of this venture into Section J.
So, Ms. Presser, shall I move us to the student searches and interrogations?
Yes. Yep.
Okay,
So JIH, searches and interrogations.
So I'm sorry,
JIH.
No.
I said the wrong thing.
All good. JIH is going to be found on page 113 then of your packets. This is the Lynn version, and I have it up on the screen at 113.
So there is a Lynn version and an MASC version of this policy. And I would recommend adopting the MASC version. The MASC version is clearer in maintaining student rights, and it covers the school's authority to search automobiles, and it outlines the guidelines for interrogations by police.
And I'm assuming the interrogation by police is on school property, correct?
Correct.
Okay. I think that there's lots of case law that says that this is what takes place, so we should adopt the MASC.
Great. Yeah, I think that sounds good. Should we make a reference here as well to the safe and welcoming school, to the sanctuary schools resolution? The same point we were talking about earlier, that we want to follow that policy and probably be implicated here in that scenario. So.
I agree.
Great.
So, in just looking really quickly at, then I would add there's a 1 and a 2 under interrogations by police. I would add a 3. And put the same sentence that we put in the policy before about complying with the sanctuary policy.
Great.
I agree.
Okay.
Any other comments on this session? Okay.
Okay, so we can move to JII, which is student complaints and grievances.
This is found on 115 of your PDF packets. JII on the screen now.
So there's actually a set. There's JII-R-1 and JII-R-2, kind of asking you to look at all of these together. I would suggest looking at the MASC version of JII, which talks about addressing complaints and grievances. So some of this it kind of covers two things. Students can have complaints or would like change that is not related to discipline. They may want a change in policy or different courses added or things like that, where they would want to be able to have a conversation with administration. So this in part addresses that, as well as the right to have grievances redressed. So while JII doesn't really have any procedure in it, I could understand if you wanted to have something that does have some procedural aspect to it. You might consider combining JII and R-1. JII-R-2 can be rescinded because the entire R-2 is about Title IX, which is now covered in the Title IX policy.
Okay.
That was a lot, and that was a lot to absorb, I know.
Does MASC have a complaint and grievance policy?
Yes. In your packet, I'm not sure which order they're in actually, but they're both there in the packet, both Lynn's and MASC's.
So the first one is Lynn, and the next one is MASC, and then the procedure one is Lynn.
Is Lynn, yep.
So MASC doesn't have a procedural?
Correct.
Okay.
So it's 116, I believe, in your packet is the MASC version.
Do others have any thoughts on this they want to?
Jared, I think that the MASC policy encompasses what our intentions are with regards to the complaint and grievances. And I think that it's sufficient.
And so we just would use our student discipline policy as opposed to this specific procedure. Attorney Satterwhite, is that what you're saying as well?
Yeah, so obviously we enact policy, the superintendent enacts procedures. All needs to be within obviously the law. So I think that the student complaints and grievances is the wording in the document is sufficient.
Yeah, I'm fine with that. Attorney,
We're going to rescind R1 and R2?
right. R2 we're definitely going to rescind because it's already covered in the Title IX. And yeah, exactly. The question is whether we want to keep R1 as a separate procedure for student complaints or whether we leave it as up to the administration basically because it's a procedure.
Maybe have Attorney Myhouse and Dr. Tutwiler chime in.
Okay, what are you specifically referring to? R1 and R2.
So we're in JII and we're leaning towards the MASC version of JII, and then R1 and R2 are both procedures. R2 is out for sure because it's already covered in the new Title IX policy. And the question is, do we keep R1 or do we leave it open as per the MASC policy?
But that's totally within the purview of, obviously, our committee. But remember this, when you adopt the policy, you put the burden on the school department to meet the terms of that policy, or open up yourself to litigation so far as failure to abide by the policy. So the more stringent the policy is, the more burdensome it is upon the administration to meet the requirements.
Yep.
That makes sense. And if you look at R1, you'll see that there's a lot of content there, and that could be an issue.
The other thing you might want to note is that R1 is in your online policy manual, but was not in the policy manual provided to us.
Okay. So then the idea would be go with MASC, JII, and then rescind R1 and R2.
Okay.
Is everybody okay with that?
I am.
Okay, great.
Just let me catch up here with my notes. Okay. So the next one would be JK, which is student conduct.
Yep, and that's the Lynn policy, JK, student conduct, is at page 120 of your packets and is on the screen now.
So the Lynn version is entirely covered by your discipline code already. So the Lynn version is redundant, and I would say that the MASC version is also covered in other places and would also not be necessary for you to adopt.
Should we send JK?
Any questions about that?
We send JK, right?
Yep. Okay.
Okay. So JKB/JKD, detention of students and student suspension.
And that's going to be on page 123 of your packet on the screen now.
Okay, let me catch up with my notes here. So, so this is where, and I don't know if Attorney Gallo, if it's easier for you to bring up the MASC version of JIC. Much of the material covered in JKB and JKD is in the MASC version of JIC, which I would recommend adopting.
Yeah, I see the discipline code.
So JIC in the Lynn version is your discipline code. In the MASC version, it is not the discipline code.
Let me
Is there?
find that. I'm not sure if that is in our packet.
Oh, okay. Then
Yeah.
we may need to, if it's not easy, maybe we need to defer this discussion till we can have the policies up in front of people. Because it is a bit confusing.
Okay. We'll come back to that one.
Let's see. No, I don't believe it's in the packet here.
Okay. Okay. I did notice, well, let's wait. Let's then, if you don't mind, let's wait till we can, let's put off that discussion till we can have all the correct documentation in front of us. And we may need to do the same thing with JKE.
Correct, yeah.
Okay. Okay. And okay, I won't even make any comments then because that will just get too complicated. In JKF then?
Yep.
and that's 127 of your packet. And that's disciplining students who may be eligible for special education.
Yeah. So in your discipline handbook, there's more appropriate language, I think, for this policy. And I think it would also be appropriate to change the title to match what the current title is on page 38 of the handbook, which is Discipline for Students Eligible for Special Education and Section 504 students.
So you're, and that's the following JKF. So you're suggesting take this first JKF, which is about a page and a half, and replacing it with the paragraph that follows. That's the other JKF.
Attorney Gallo, can you bring the following? I guess, Attorney Gallo, does this match what's on, do you know if this matches what's in the handbook?
No, I think the idea is that when we go back to the discipline code, there's an appendix there that includes discipline of students who may qualify for special education or for a 504. And the idea would be that because that's really procedure, we'd house it there. So getting rid of these policies, which frankly are not entirely consistent with the procedures in the handbook, would be the idea.
What's the source of the second JKF? Do we know where that's from?
That would be, that's not an MASC policy. So the source would be Lynn.
It's to do with manifestation law, though, that if there's going to be a change of placement, meaning a suspension or expulsion of greater than 10 days, it can't be related to a manifestation of a student's disability or the reason for their special education or the district's failure to implement that.
That's correct. So,
yeah.
So it should be, I believe it should be addressed.
Correct. And so in the discipline code, I can even, if you'd like me to just change screens quickly, I can even show you in the discipline code. Let's see if I can find it quickly for you.
I remember seeing something like that because we actually
exactly
talked about it less.
Mm-hmm. So you can see that the last couple of pages of the discipline code, it's really like an appendix, discipline of students eligible for special education in section 504. And so that is current and good.
And we adopted this already.
We have not, because this is part of the overall discipline code that I think we were looking to adopt for next year, taking into account student input. So it'll be part and parcel of that process.
I agree that it's duplicate with regards to the language. We've already addressed it, and as a special education attorney, I think that it's vital to have that.
Mm-hmm. Great.
So rescind JKF.
Yeah, just rescind both JKFs. Everybody okay? It's already covered in the.
Yes.
Yeah.
What, if I could ask Attorney Nicholson, what section are we talking about presently?
We're talking about JKF, which is, and there's two versions of JKF, and Attorney Gallo has, it's page 129 of the PDF is the second.
I have it in front of me right now. I'm looking at it.
Okay.
What you didn't have was a discipline policy that we talked about a couple months ago. I think that's what you're missing, Attorney.
Yes. What Attorney Gallo was saying was that the content of JKF, both the JKFs that you have in your physical packet, is covered better in the discipline code.
Exactly.
So wouldn't you refer this out to your special ed director for her input? Before you adopt any language?
So could I?
Yeah, Attorney Gallo.
Thank you. So the special education department, the council that they use, looked at it and cleared it. So that that process has occurred in that way.
And, it's a good point, Attorney Myhouse, and I think that comment actually applies to a lot of this. Special education is heavily implicated, I think, in a lot of these issues, as is some of the other team members. You think about social emotional learning. Attorney Gallo mentioned the student input. And I think that's the goal of the broader review that Attorney Gallo mentioned, is to make sure that those voices are being pulled in and reflected.
Fine.
Great. That's high praise coming from Attorney Myhouse there.
What? I missed that, Mr. Wilson.
I said that's high praise coming from you, Attorney Myhouse.
I always praise your abilities.
Okay, I think that brings us to JKG, which is team attack.
And this was a real favorite of Ms. Presser, Ms. Jules, and myself. And this is 130 on page 130 of your packet. JKG, team attack.
So without knowing any history, my first question was, I don't understand what a team attack is. And that seemed a little bit difficult for anyone to define. So I guess I need to know a little bit, if people know the history of this policy, whether they believe that it needs to remain. And certainly if it's there, I think the term team attack needs to be defined in the policy. And there needs to be a little bit more explicit information wording about the consequences.
Dorothy, I can input
Sure.
some of this. A team attack in a public school in Lynn would be like if a girl's in the bathroom and like five people walk into the bathroom and they don't like this girl and they attack her. And there's hair being pulled out of heads. There's vicious attacks happening. So that would be a team attack. It would be like a group attack. A bunch of people are upset with someone. You looked at my girlfriend the wrong way, and now I'm going to take care of you. They might break out into a group fight in the cafeteria. I think that's what they mean by a team attack.
Okay, well, that was sort of what we inferred, but we weren't quite sure.
Exactly. You have to identify. Attorney Nicholson?
Yeah, Attorney Satterwhite.
Can I just ask, is there, Dr. Tutwiler, is there a student study team in each school?
Yep.
Absolutely. As a matter of fact, Attorney Gallo leads that effort.
That is true.
Okay. And they're involved with these things to this present day?
The way that it's described in this particular section is a little bit of a stretch. I mean, certainly if a student has been exhibiting behavior issues over a period of time, he or she might be referred to the student study team, to see if there's an approach, an intervention over a period of time that might help that student decrease those behaviors in the classroom. This does say if a student has a history of fighting, they would be referred to the student study team. I mean, Attorney Gallo can keep me honest here. I don't see that team being used in that way, in present day. And I also say that, this is the first time I've seen this policy. The very first part about bystanders being referred to the superintendent's office for an expulsion hearing. I don't know that that's an expellable offense even anymore. So I'm not sure that this policy has a lot of.
And it talks about the kids jumping in to stop the fight and how they suggest against it in adulthood. But I think what it does is, and Jared and John, maybe you agree or disagree. I think that what it's attempting to do is differentiate the difference between gang activity and just a group of people that are attacking someone else, or are around when fights and such take place. And I think that we should still do that. Not everyone is a gang member, but in the definition of a gang. So maybe having Dr. Tutwiler and Attorney Gallo further look into the language would be appropriate, and maybe further identifying what team attack means. It would be sufficient, and I think relevant.
Okay, great. Yeah. Ms. Gailey, and then Dr. Tutwiler, do you want to address that specifically? And then
just quickly. I mean, at a glance, this thing's going to need a complete renovation. And my thought is that once it's done being renovated, it's going to look like other parts of the existing policy. I mean, we're happy to go through that exercise, but I mean, I see some stuff in here that's outdated, and it feels to me like there are other policies around, student discipline that are addressed here. But we can do that. We can go through it.
We'll go with Ms. Gailey.
I want to piggyback with Dr. Tutwiler on that because looking at this, whereas I have seen people getting attacked for different reasons throughout my tenure as a teacher, it could be construed as bullying. It's more like a bullying tactic. And then we implemented a student study team, different clubs for sensitivity. And then I think it was going around the idea of bullying. But this was what it was like when they were physically attacking people.
Thank you.
That's why it was written, probably.
Yep. Mr. Ford?
I think this whole team attack, it's too vague. I think it should be rescinded. If you watch sports, first guy starts it, second and third man always gets the penalty. So, that's what's going to happen here.
Yeah, no, I hear what you're saying, Mr. Ford.
May I chime in as well?
Yeah, Attorney Gallo.
Thank you. So just to piggyback a little bit on what Superintendent Tutwiler mentioned, and also Ms. Gately, all of the offenses that would be part of a team attack could be disciplined individually. That it's part of a team does not really change the disciplinary mechanisms. So to me, it's unnecessarily duplicative. My opinion on it.
Okay.
Attorney Myhouse,
Yes,
would you agree with that assessment?
I would agree with Mr. Gallo on that, yes.
Okay. Can we resend it, Jarrett?
Yeah, I'm fine with that.
Okay. John?
Everyone else is as well. Okay, great.
Okay. That actually brings us to the end of the discipline policies in Section J.
Nice.
2020 did something good.
So we have a couple things to go back and look at, but good body of work there.
Awesome. Thank you, Ms. Presser, and also Attorney Gallo and Ms. Jules for the effort there.
Absolutely. And we do have that preface. I don't know if committee members wanted to see that tonight or just take it for their files, but on the screen is that preface starting point of the draft anyway for the discipline code that incorporates some of the things that we talked about in last meetings.
Yeah, I would like to look at that. I think, we should try to use this time to just push through as much as we can. And so that was next. You'll recall that this came up in the context of talking about the discipline code and, seeing penalties listed from minimum to maximum without sort of a clear indication of what lower level offenses would result in. And obviously all of us knowing that a lower level offense isn't going to result in the maximum penalty, but to putting some of that in writing, and as an overall sort of value statement about, particularly in the broader conversations that we've been having as a district, as a community about discipline, about restorative justice, about the general philosophy of it. So, I mean, I thought it was really helpful. I thought it was very well done, and just wanted to thank you for doing it. But I wanted to invite comment from anyone, either for the authors, if you wanted to share any context, or from the committee, if anybody had any questions or comments.
I just want to say that I every word in this preface is extremely important, and obviously I shared a little bit of my experience with the Lynn Public Schools, and what I like is the second paragraph. I think the last sentence where you talk about the flexibility the administration has, but you're also going to take into account the individual circumstances in each incident of student misconduct, and I think that's vital, because we come from all different circumstances, and it's important to understand those, to understand the behavior. Ariana, please. So I appreciate that.
And we looked at discipline codes and discipline policies from a number of different districts, Boston, Springfield, Fall River, Brockton, Lowell. Two in particular we really liked, and those were Lawrence and New Bedford. And so, thinking about your experience, Attorney Satterwhite, and some preferences that were talked about, the language from Lawrence, the language from New Bedford, that was woven together with the Lynn sort of mission statement and core values. And that's really those first three paragraphs that you see there.
Yeah, no, I think it's great. I think it definitely accomplishes what we had discussed. Mr. Ford, did you have something?
No, I particularly like paragraph 4. I think we adopt.
Great. Excellent. So the next thing we had for tonight was if Attorney Gallo or Dr. Chatwell, whoever it was, wanted to update us on. We had talked about last time a couple subsections of the code and section J, wanting to sort of solicit more additional input, specifically from students, the dress code, the truancy awareness policy, just to get an update on that process.
So there are a couple of different things happening there. One is the idea of the discipline code, that there should be not just student input, but some input, potentially beyond that from staff, maybe community input. In speaking to Dr. Tutwiler about the timing of that, the discipline code is rolled out really annually in the district handbook. And so we'd be talking about a rollout, next September. And so really, and Dr. Tutwiler could potentially speak more about timelines, but that's not something that right now is urgent. In fact, we really would need to wait to put it into play until the summer months. So that's where that lies. But the other piece of it is talking to staff about, the truancy and lateness and student attendance policies. And so we are having a pretty robust conversation with Kristen Freyer about that. And Mary Jules and I met with Kristen, and also sort of middleman some emails between Kristen and Ms. Presser on those subjects as well. So those are sort of the moving pieces that you're not seeing in print today.
Thank you. Dr. Tutwiler, did you have your hand up?
Yeah, I appreciate what Attorney Gallo just said, captured it all. The only thing that I would add is that, the timing around when that first conversation happened and we made a decision that we wanted to solicit student input, was approaching the end of the first quarter for secondary schools. And so we really felt like we wanted to take the time to do it right and make the process robust, really give people the opportunity to chime in. I'm really looking at a scenario where that process is completed in between, when we get back from winter vacation and sometime completing it sometime before February vacation. So somewhere on those bookends.
Great. No, that makes sense. I mean, I think that sounds good about the target of the next discipline, the next distribution. But as you sort of just implied right there, working backwards from that, there's a lot of lead time to get to the actual publication, right? Because we're going to get input, we're going to want to digest that input, put it right, maybe get it more, maybe go back to the original stakeholders to make sure they're okay with it, and then it also has to come to us, and we'll have to, go through it. So, if that's happening this winter, I think that makes a lot of sense. Could you sketch out a little bit what sort of process you are imagining for how you would, we have a lot of students, right? So what's the thinking as to how that would happen?
So I don't want to create that sketch in isolation. I really want to lean on the secondary principals and what they think would be an appropriate path forward. We do have a meeting with them on Thursday. That agenda is packed solid, but I'm planning on getting a little bit of airtime around this topic to plant the seed, allow them to go back to their respective teams, and then circle back with a proposal on how we can do this in a way that is collaborative and gives people an opportunity to really share their thinking.
Okay. Yeah, and it could be good for us to get an update on that. Particularly, you had mentioned getting community stakeholders involved, and that could be a good role for this body for school committee members to share, sort of brainstorm about potential community organizations. It would be good to pull in. Does anybody else have comments on the process for gathering input for the discipline code and the tardiness truancy policy? Yeah, Ms. Kaylee.
I have one question. It's sort of like off the cuff on this, but when you mentioned the supervisor of attendance, I was curious to when we would be hiring that supervisor of attendance. The posting we were looking at was February 14th, and then all COVID-19 came up. But I would love to have that supervisor of attendance on board so they could input. So maybe I'll put it on the next agenda and go forward with that. How do you feel about that, Dr. Stopweiler? Okay.
Do it.
Okay. All right. So, any other thoughts on that? On the discipline code, truancy tardiness policy? All right, so the next thing we had was the question that we had referred last time to Attorney Myhouse. Attorney Myhouse?
Yeah, I reviewed the question specifically about the rescinding of the student attendance policy relative to the Census and Attendance Department. Well, obviously the census pays no basis in reality. The only reticence I have is that work permits are still given out. They used to be given out at the attendance office. Now it's been delegated to the high schools. And before I give you a final definitive answer on it, I'd like to wait till the next meeting so I can just go down to the high schools and see what they're doing. Get the information, put it together. But as far as the word census, that's obviously no purpose. It shouldn't be there. And most of the other stuff, you're correct. It's part of the work description of the attendance department. So it's up to you whether you want to reinforce it with the regulation. But the question relative to work permits is still outstanding. But I hope this would remain on the table. Allow me to get more information. I'll get back to you on it.
Okay. That sounds good. Does anybody have any questions there? We have a couple open items in J because there was a couple that came up tonight as well, so we'll just keep that on the list. All right. So when we had talked last time, we had said the goal was to have these subcommittee meetings on a separate night and just go for 2 hours. So we can circle back and start again with B where we left off if we want to, or if people feel like that's too much of a momentum shift, we could pick up with B at the next one. What are people feeling?
We have to address it sometime. So if we have the 30 minutes left, we could probably get through some of it.
Okay. All right. We'll have to, but why don't we do this right now before so we'll do it at the very end. For the next meeting, I assume we'll want to do that in January because of the holiday break for the second half of December. Is that okay with people? Okay. All right. Ms. Presser, can you remind us what we were doing in B?
I believe that the place that we need to start up again is BDE, which is subcommittees of the school committee.
Okay.
I am not sure who's going to screen share here. I can bring up mine, but I don't have any page numbers to go along with things.
I think there's only 8 pages.
Yeah, it's 8 pages. The document that Mary sent out today
It's only 8 pages, right?
Yeah, but that's just the that's just your note.
Yeah, the 8 pages is probably just my notes.
Yeah,
with,
that's what it was.
Yeah.
All right, so why don't I don't know how we're going to screen share either because I have a hard copy.
Well, I can screen share if you're willing. We can try it, see how it works.
Okay.
Okay. So I probably need permission to screen share.
I just sent it to you.
Okay. Let's see if I can bring up the right thing to start with. Okay. Is everyone seeing BA? Let me get to BDE here. Without making you too dizzy. Almost there. Okay. So there's the Lynn version of BDE, which lists the standing subcommittees that you have, has the information about how subcommittees are formed, and notes that they're subject to the open meeting law. Also has information about how subcommittee meetings are called. So just a little bit of thinking about, I've never seen a subcommittee policy that actually has the time that subcommittees are called as part of the policy. I don't know if you want to have that remain as part of the policy or not. So let me bring up the MASC version. Part of the MASC version talks about the subcommittee being provided with a list of its functions and duties, and points out that the subcommittee makes recommendations but may not act for the school committee. So one thought here would be you may want a blend of these two policies, one that points out some specifics about procedure, and if you want to continue to list your standing subcommittees, you could do that in policy as well.
Mr. Ford, did you have?
No, we had more than 5 subcommittees, all right?
Yeah, that doesn't have.
Oh, so that's not the,
Curriculum and personnel are two different subcommittees.
Yeah.
Yes, too, is the grant subcommittee, I think, maybe.
In negotiations, you're missing negotiations too.
Yeah.
Negotiation grants and curriculum personnel.
Oh, and the policy subcommittee.
good point.
This?
Okay, so would people be okay with that to take the MASC version, but then use our current list of standing subcommittees?
Does the MASC allow for expansions of subcommittees without having to change the policy?
Well, actually, the MASC, yes, because the MASC policy doesn't actually name the subcommittees that you have. And so, while a lot of school committees have subcommittees that consistently roll over from year to year, the MASC policy says that at your organizational meeting, you'll establish or you'll appoint your subcommittee members. So it does allow Attorney Satterwhite for more flexibility and would keep your policy from being outdated, as you know we've talked about in a couple other policies, by not looking at it regularly and having it become outdated if you change your subcommittee composition.
I would be okay with just adopting the MASC without the addressing of the current ones we have.
Okay, that's how me. For the MASC, we do this every 2 years, though, don't we? The MASC says it's every year.
Yeah, so it could, and if we take out the word annual, the school committee shall appoint members to the subcommittee at their organizational meeting.
That's fine.
Okay, and then for a period, then it would be for a period of 2 years?
Correct.
Okay.
I don't think it's changed in, well, we going on 4 years with the committee we have now. So, I don't remember us meeting and changing anyone, for that period of time. So, do we also need that time frame as well?
Well, you could, I mean, at your organizational meeting say, we're just keeping the same subcommittees and the same subcommittee members, and you'd be done. You would have fulfilled that appointment. Is that kind of what you're asking?
Well, I was just wondering if it could just say the school committee shall appoint members to subcommittees at their organization meeting, period.
Well, I think the reason for the 2 years is the elections. There could be a change in the school committee, so obviously that would change the subcommittees.
Yeah, and the the language doesn't change that either.
Yep, you could take out the phrase for a period of.
Yeah, that's what I was saying. So it should be the subcommittee at their organizational meeting, period.
Yeah, I think we're all saying the same thing.
Yeah.
But, okay.
So
All right.
cross out for, so just put a period after meeting.
Mr. Ford, is that okay? Yeah, okay.
Okay. Making sure I have my notes here.
Great.
Okay, so advisory committees to the school committee. Just to clarify, advisory committees are committees that would have additional members appointed beyond school committee members. That's the difference between an advisory committee and a subcommittee. So in the MASC version is a little bit more explicit about the responsibilities of an advisory committee, which I think would be, if a citizen is appointed to an advisory committee, might be helpful information to have. to be a little bit, normally I'm all for short policies, but in this case, I think the longer policy might be a little bit more beneficial.
Yeah, all right.
Yeah,
Can I ask, Dr. Tutwiler, we've used in the past, I think, 2 years, several advisory committees, correct?
School committee advisory committees?
In general, they were somewhat attached to the school committee, right?
You'll have to remind me what the specific effort.
Well, for the district-wide, the district strategic plan, that was an advisory committee, right?
I mean, I don't know that I would call it that in the way that it's being talked about here. I mean, there was school committee representation, and then there was a team of folks that were put together. I don't know that that's what's being referenced here.
Okay. Would MASC be considered an advisory? What exactly is an example then?
Sorry, you're asking me?
Yes, sorry.
So an advisory committee would be, for example, if the school committee wanted to put together a committee to advise them on a topic like the example that I often use is late start time. And so they wanted to pull in, citizens or other people from the community that would advise them on the different aspects that they might have to think about, like how does it affect traffic, or how does it affect bus routes, or how does it affect childcare. And
so it sounds more formal, because we have people come in and give presentations. And it's kind of, I guess you can call an advisory type thing, but this is a more formal process.
Correct.
Okay.
I think I believe that the superintendent hiring committee would have been an advisory committee. Do you remember? Yeah.
Great example.
Ms. Gailey, is that a question that you had?
I just was going to add to what Michael was saying, and this advisory committee is for the school committee, like us to pick someone. Dr. Tutwiler brings in people from the school district to advise us. It's not the same thing. Do I get that correct?
It sounds like that's what's being presented to us. And I think that, it's important to have this power, to have the advisory committee. And I like the version that you're presenting, Ms. Pressler, because it's pretty detailed and can, give us some direction.
Yeah.
And there, just to clarify, there are times when the superintendent will have an advisory committee that the superintendent puts together, and that is different than the school committee putting together an advisory committee. For instance, the superintendent may put together a committee for hiring a principal, and that would be the superintendent's committee. And that would not be subject to, they would not be a public body. They would not be subject to the open meeting law and so forth.
And we have in the past, like when we were doing the policy changes for the attendance. Remember how we went to Patrick and we asked him to go to certain members of the administration to get feedback on this or that, and then they'll call the districts. This is more formally.
Yes, that would be more formal than that.
Someone that might have a particular expertise. Yeah, and we're relying on that. Otherwise, again, I'm not saying that the people that Dr. Tutwiler goes to aren't necessarily experts in certain fields. We might need to get to that particular point in the future, especially if there's a position that is not one that the district has. So I agree that we should have this in this format.
Yeah, MASC format. You're trying to say that, right?
Correct. Yep.
Mr. Ford, that look good to you? Okay.
Okay,
I agree.
okay.
Next two look pretty easy.
So school councils, the next set of policies are around school councils. A couple notes about that. First of all, BDFA on school councils. The MASC version and the Lynn version are the same, so there's really nothing to talk about there.
Great.
That's an easy one. And then -1, the school improvement plan. Again, the policies match. According to what we saw, the Lynn version is only in the online manual, so I don't know if that needs to be formally adopted, if it's not part of the official manual.
I think we're going to formally adopt it as the package, so we.
Yeah, okay. Okay, that makes sense. And then on the BDFA-E-2, there are some differences. I believe that your policy predates the change to the law that was made, that the school committee is no longer the approving body for school improvement plans. It's the superintendent who approves the school improvement plans. So there are some wording changes that need to be made to comply with that.
Yeah.
Is there an MASC version already, or is that a change that?
Well, you know, this is one, there is an MASC version. And I think this is one point where the really super duper woman in our office that compares the policies didn't catch some of the differences between the two. So the only one in your packet was, she pointed out the, what's highlighted at the bottom, but there's actually some changes that need to be made in the top paragraph as well. That the written school improvement plan should be submitted by the principal to the superintendent for approval and the school committee for review.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
First date, consistent with the rest of the districts?
Say that again?
The June 1st, you see approval by June 1st?
So that is actually in your policy right now. The MASC policy says July 1st, but June 1st is what's in your current policy.
And Dr. Tutwiler, is there a reason for that, why it's different?
No idea.
Ms. Gately, did you have a question?
I do. I don't really, I've been on this committee for 5 years. I don't recall that the SIM plan or the school improvement plan came forward to us.
I thought we got some for classical and Pickering, didn't we?
No, this is a different thing. The school improvement plan is, I thought that was all on Tutwiler's purview.
Yeah. Dr. Tutwiler.
So I think what has happened historically is, when school improvement plans are assembled, I mean, there's a pretty methodical approach to doing so. It's actually organized out of the curriculum department. Principals follow a process with their school improvement plan teams at each respective school. I believe it's law for them to create one each year. And I believe, I don't know that I've, in the 6 years that I've been here, that I've seen them presented to school committee, because that would be a very, very long meeting. I believe they were assembled in a giant binder and made available to school committee. I believe that's the case. I've not seen them presented either.
We should be specific to that in our policy.
So, go ahead, Attorney Satterwhite.
Sorry, and we should be specific that the policies would be made available to us, as opposed to us actually reviewing them if we're not.
Right. So maybe this sounds like this one, Ms. Presser, is one where the you could share a proposed version with us based on the MSC version and the updated law.
I think I missed a word there. So I can revise it the way I believe it should be read based on this discussion and get it back to you. Is that what you're asking?
Yes.
Okay.
Great.
Somebody's watching and it just sent me a note that it's put on a thumb drive and given to school committee. That's the way they recall that process.
No. I remember wanting to have it presented, but it would have taken too long.
Hmm.
That's what I was told.
I'd be curious to see what they look like, to be honest.
Oh, this is a nice little binder.
Are we ready to move on?
I believe so.
All right. So the conduct of school council business. Our policy, so our policy has a different number of times per year that the school councils meet, but this is really a local decision. So if this complies with your local practice, there's no reason to change it.
4 times per year on a quarterly basis?
Dr. Stillwater, is that consistent with your?
It's at least that. That I would see that as being absolutely the bottom. Most schools do more than that. I would say almost monthly, but it's more than 4 times a year.
And do you think that's sufficient enough? Obviously, it's complying with the law, but do you think having a minimum of 4 is?
If you have fewer than that, I don't know, of what use that body would be to the school community. In both of my principalships, it was close to monthly.
Yeah, it looks like
6-7 times a year.
Reading this right is suggested it be monthly, at least monthly. Is that correct, Ms. Presley?
Yeah, our model policy says monthly. There are committees that change that. So again, this is really your local practice that should be in here.
Dr. Stillwater, what do you have a recommendation there?
I recommend that you leave it a minimum of 4 times. There are circumstances sometimes that drive fewer meetings in a particular year, and that's okay. But I know that most schools do very close to month.
Okay. Anybody have comments on this?
I just feel as though Dr. Stillwater was spot on when he said that if they met less than 4 times, what good would the body have? So when he said that, I thought, well, why not 6? 6 times per year.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm fine with that. 6 isn't, so that's at least every other month. That would be the idea.
Yep, that was the idea, yeah.
Keep in mind, and I don't have the document in front of me, and this text is small. I believe that the first meeting has to happen by October 1st. Dorothy, keep me honest on that.
There's nothing in this policy that says there's nothing in the policy that has a date for a first meeting.
I think there's something so school councils are also, I believe, driven by law. And I'm fairly certain that there's a first meeting by, and I believe it's in October, because you need to give time for, there to be a process for new family or community representatives to be selected. So typically at a school's first open house, they will have a process where, where new representatives can be selected. I think you can still, that leaves plenty of time for 6 meetings to happen. I'm comfortable with that. But I just want the committee to be mindful that, it doesn't start in September. It usually starts in October.
So if we can have whatever the statute says about when the first meeting needs to be by, and then we just change it to 6 times per year, as opposed to 4 times on a quarterly basis, because obviously it wouldn't make sense if it said that.
I think I have Ms. Gately and then Mr. Ford.
So in the second paragraph at the end, the next to the last sentence, it says that at its first meeting of the school year, which could be in October, the council will set its calendar of regular meetings for the year. And you could say for 6, they have to meet for 6 times or whatever.
I think we were going to change the part that's highlighted where it says a minimum, the first sentence of that paragraph.
To say 6 instead of 4.
Yeah.
Yep.
My opinion, I'd leave it with the 4 because you can still shoot for 6, but you don't violate anything if you only get the 4. And it may be difficult to do the 6. For example, like this year could be a problem.
A lot of these councils are meeting via Zoom. Our district mission statement is, high standards. I don't want to, we're setting high standards. I think it's only beneficial to the school and to the students if they meet a couple more times, at minimum a year. That's where I came from. I guess, from a parent and just from the input we've already got from a Dr. Tutwiler. Obviously these play a key function in our schools, especially when you have parental and guardian involvement. And, we wouldn't have a specific law addressed to this school council if it wasn't a vital part to our neighborhood schools, to be honest with you. So I would still stand with the 6, but again,
I think they could be every month, but I'm always leery of setting a bar that's too high that you might have it in your policy and you can't make it for some reason. I would encourage it to do every month, but I just wouldn't penalize myself if for some reason you miss it.
If Dr. Tutwiler, you can correct me if I'm wrong here, but if we're hitting almost monthly at most schools, and I would think that the 6 would be no problem for everybody else. So I hear what you're saying, Mr. Ford, and I want to give everybody leeway to deal with changing circumstances. But if we're just about monthly, so we're averaging 11 or 12, I feel like 6 should be no problem.
Okay.
Great. So that's the buzzer.
as we end with school attorney. John, you made it.
It's always good to hang out a cliffhanger for the viewers.
Exactly.
So thank you so much, everybody, for all your input, and particularly Ms. Presser, Attorney Gallo, Ms. Jules for the contribution. I think I'll be asking Ms. Jules to reach out to coordinate the next one, and we can pick up here.
Okay.
Adjourn.
I think we need it from a member of the.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
All right. Any second, all in favor?
Aye.
Oh, I'm not on that committee.
Have a good one, guys.
Good night.
Have a good
Good
night.
night. Thank you, Dorothy.
See you Thursday, right?
Good night, everyone. See you
That's
Thursday.
right.
Much, Dorothy.
Okay, good night.
Good to see
Good
everyone.
night.
Night, Charlie, and everyone.
Guys.
Don, good night.
Good night.
See you.